Welcome to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Post-Acute Care Provider Training Series. My name's Dave Nolly, and I'm moderating today's training session on Section G, Functional Status of the MDS 3.0. Specifically, today's session will focus on Item G0110, Activities of Daily Living Assistance Coding of ADL Self-Performance, which includes the Rule of Three, with scenarios to provide additional clarification. While the 2013 MDS 3.0 educational programs provide great information, it's critical to remember that the RAI User's Manual, which is available at the CMS website, must be used by assessors to ensure accuracy and consistency in coding. I would like to take a moment to introduce our panelists, Mary Pratt and Lori Grocholski. Thank you, Mary and Lori, for joining me today. Chapter 3 of the RAI User's Manual is where intent, rationale, and step-by-step coding instructions can be found for each section and item of the MDS 3.0. The goal of this chapter is to facilitate the accurate coding of the MDS 3.0 and to provide assessors with the rationale and resources to optimize resident care and outcomes. Mary, would you explain the intent of Section G to our audience?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Dave. The intent of this section is to assess the resident's need for assistance with activities of daily living, altered gait and balance, and decreased range of motion. Before beginning your assessment, please be sure you review the item rationale, steps for assessment, and coding instructions in Section G of the RAI User's Manual. Remember to have Section G of the manual open to refer to throughout this presentation.
Section G certainly generates a lot of questions. I know you hope to address many of the key issues CMS has received from providers during this training session. Lori, can you tell us about the revisions and added changes to the RAI User's Manual?
I'd be happy to. I want to stress that these revisions do not change how items are coded in Section G. However, they do provide additional clarification and guidance as to how assessors are to code Item G0110 and how to apply the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions and the Rule of Three. In reorganizing Section G of Chapter 3, the ADL Self-Performance coding instructions now precede the instructions for the Rule of Three. This is important because assessors need to know each of the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions before applying the Rule of Three. Additionally, in order to apply the instructions for the Rule of Three, the assessor needs to know whether the activity occurred at least 3 or more times or fewer than 3 times.
Interesting. Mary, can you provide an example how all of these instructions work together to impact ADL coding?
Yes. Let's first take a look at our coding definition for extensive assistance, Code 3. Use Code 3, extensive assistance, if a resident performed part of the activity over the last 7 days and help of the following types was provided 3 or more times. Weight-bearing support provided 3 or more times, or full staff performance of activity 3 or more times during part but not all of the last 7 days. Using this definition, let us think about an example to illustrate appropriate coding. A resident received weight-bearing assistance 3 times during the 7-day look-back period. This would meet the ADL Self-Performance definition of extensive assistance, since it satisfies one of the criteria.
Mary, can you explain these 2 criteria for extensive assistance in a little more detail?
Sure, Dave. As you can see, there are 2 criteria for extensive assistance. The first criterion is if there are 3 episodes of weight-bearing support provided. The second criterion is if there are 3 episodes of total dependence or full staff performance provided that occurred during part but not all of the days in the 7-day look-back period. The RAI User's Manual now includes an OR between the 2 criteria so that the assessors will know that the definition of extensive assistance may be met by applying either criterion. Episodes of weight-bearing assistance and full staff performance cannot be combined here in order to code extensive assistance. The only time episodes can be combined is when an activity occurs 3 or more times and at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level. There has been some confusion about the ability to count episodes of full staff performance under the extensive assistance definition. Total dependence, also known as Code 4, became much more specific with the implementation of MDS 3.0. Total dependence applies only if the resident requires full staff performance of any aspect of the ADL every time the ADL occurred, and the activity itself occurred 3 or more times during the 7-day look-back period. So unless this is the case, Code 4 cannot be entered on the MDS. However, episodes of full staff performance that occur at least 3 times, but not every time during the 7-day look-back period, can be counted under the second criterion of extensive assistance. When an assessor encounters an ADL scenario that meets the definition for extensive assistance, he or she would go no further because the 3 episodes of weight-bearing assistance meet the first criterion in the definition of extensive assistance. The same scenario can also be described as meeting the first rule of 3, which says that when an activity occurred 3 or more times at any one level, you code that level.
Thanks, Mary. Lori, why does the rule of 3 exist?
The rule of 3 is a method to assist the assessor in determining the appropriate code for the resident's ADL self-performance. It is important that assessors understand the components of each ADL, the ADL self-performance coding level definitions, and the rule of 3. However, in order to properly apply the rule of 3, the assessor must first note which ADL occurred, how many times each ADL occurred, and what type and level of support was provided for each ADL over the entire 7-day look-back period. Before I get into the specific rules under the rule of 3, there are 4 ADL self-performance coding level definitions that are exceptions to the rule of 3. Codes 0, 4, 7, and 8. Code 0, independent. This is an exception because this code is only used if the resident completed the ADL with no help or oversight every time the ADL occurred during the 7-day look-back period and the activity occurred at least 3 times. For example, if an ADL occurred 7 times over the last 7 days and each time the resident was independent in completing the ADL, Code 0 could be entered on the MDS. If there was any other level of support provided during those 7 times the ADL occurred, Code 0 could not be used. The next exception is Code 4, total dependence. This is also a code that is entered on the MDS only if it reflects the level of support the resident received every time the ADL was performed. If total dependence did not occur at least 3 times and every time during the last 7 days, it cannot be the code entered on the MDS. However, episodes of full staff performance that occur at least 3 times, but not every time, meet the second criterion of the extensive assistance definition. The third exception to the rule of 3 is Code 7. Code 7 is used if the ADL occurred only once or twice in the last 7 days. For example, if a resident was in the facility only for a few hours or a day or 2, it's feasible that an ADL may have occurred only once or twice. The last exception to the rule of 3 is Code 8, activity did not occur. Code 8 means that either the ADL itself did not occur or that family and/or non-facility staff provided care 100% of the time for that ADL over the entire 7-day look-back period. This code cannot be entered on the MDS unless this level occurred at least 3 times and every time during the last 7 days. If there is even one episode where the activity did occur, the assessor cannot enter the Code 8 on the MDS. The instructions for the rule of 3 are only applied when an ADL has occurred 3 or more times. If you can apply the definition directly when an activity has occurred at least 3 times, you don't need to go any further into the instructions. Always stop at the first code that applies to the scenario, whether you are using the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions, the rule of 3, or the ADL Self-Performance algorithm. The important thing is to have all of the information at hand about the ADL you are assessing.
Well, now that we've reviewed the exceptions to the rules, Mary, could you go over each of the rules of 3?
Yes, of course. The first rule of 3 states that the ADL has to occur 3 times at any one level. This means that if you have an ADL that has occurred at least 3 times and at any one level, that is the level that is coded, regardless of whether there are other levels that have occurred less than 3 times. Let's take a look at the first coding scenario that has been added to Section G. This scenario demonstrates the first rule of 3. The following dressing assistance was provided to Mr. X during the look-back period. 2 times he required guided maneuvering of his arms to don his shirt. 4 times he had pain in his shoulders, and he required the staff to assist him with his shirt by physically lifting each of his arms. This component of the dressing ADL occurred 6 times in the 7-day look-back period.
So, Mary, how would you code this example?
Looking at the ADL coding scenario, we can see that there were 2 times where Mr. X required non-weight-bearing assistance and 4 times where he required weight-bearing assistance. Therefore, the appropriate code to enter on the MDS is extensive assistance, 3. We can also see that the ADL component occurred 3 or more times and that these 3 or more times occurred at one level, weight-bearing. Thus, the ADL scenario is also consistent with the first rule of 3 in that the ADL occurred at least 3 times and occurred at one level 3 times. Since the first rule of 3 was met by the 4 episodes of weight-bearing assistance, the 2 episodes of non-weight-bearing assistance are not considered.
Okay, Mary, thanks for clarifying. Now, let's discuss the second rule of 3.
Okay, Dave. In contrast to the first rule of 3, the second rule of 3 refers to when there are multiple levels where the activity occurred 3 times or more, not just one level. Let's go over another scenario which demonstrates the second rule of 3. Over the last 7 days, Mrs. C required verbal cueing 4 times for hand placement during stand pivot transfers from her wheelchair. She required weight-bearing assistance 3 times to help her rise from the wheelchair, steady, and help her turn with her back to the edge of the bed. Once she was at the edge of the bed and put her hand on her transfer bar, she was able to sit. She completed this transfer without assistance in 14 other occurrences during the 7-day look-back period.
Okay, and how would this scenario be coded?
Well, in this example, there were 4 episodes of supervision and 3 episodes of weight-bearing assistance. Therefore, extensive assistance, 3, would be the appropriate code to enter on the MDS.
Well, can you explain this in a little more detail?
Sure, Dave. In this scenario, we can see that Mrs. C required verbal cueing from the staff for hand placement 4 times. This is considered supervision. There were 3 times that the staff had to physically support Mrs. C during a portion of the transfer. This is considered weight-bearing assistance. In total, this ADL occurred 21 times over the 7-day look-back period. There were 4 episodes of supervision and 3 episodes of weight-bearing assistance. When you bear someone's weight, it requires hands-on physical assistance, and this is considered a more dependent level of assistance for the resident than simply verbal cueing. That is why in this example, extensive assistance, 3 would be the appropriate code to enter on the MDS.
Okay, Mary, can you go through the rationale step by step?
No problem. The ADL occurred 21 times over the 7-day look-back period. Mrs. C required supervision 4 times and weight-bearing assistance 3 times during the same period. There were also 14 episodes where she did not require any assistance at all. This scenario should cause the assessor to look at the second rule of 3. The assessor should also keep in mind that the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions, because they will help identify which ADL Self-Performance code is the most dependent. Let's start with the 14 episodes where the resident did not require any assistance. We know that we cannot use this code, code 0, because it is exempt, since there were 7 episodes of the ADL that did not occur at the independent level. Now let's look carefully at those 7 episodes we identified as supervision and weight-bearing assistance. The ADL Self-Performance coding level definition for supervision applies if the activity occurred 3 or more times and the assistance provided was oversight, encouragement, or cueing. Continuing on, the ADL Self-Performance coding level definition of extensive assistance states that in order to code extensive assistance, the ADL has to occur 3 or more times and that weight-bearing support has to be provided 3 or more times, or full staff performance has to be provided 3 or more times during part but not all of the last 7 days. Looking at these ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions, extensive assistance involves more staff assistance and therefore is the most dependent code.
Thanks, Mary. Let me turn to you, Lori, as we continue our discussion and tackle the third rule of 3.
The third rule of 3 applies when an activity occurs 3 or more times and at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level. Where the third rule of 3 departs from the prior 2 rules is the addition of the last phrase, but not 3 times at any one level. This looks a little bit like the first rule of 3, but do not get confused. The first rule of 3 applies if the activity occurred 3 or more times at any one level. The third rule of 3 applies if the activity occurred 3 or more times at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level. These are very important distinctions to understand because the assessor cannot apply the sub-items under the third rule of 3 unless the ADL scenario itself applies to the third rule of 3. Speaking of the sub-items under the third rule of 3, they are as follows. First, convert episodes of full staff performance to weight-bearing assistance when applying the third rule of 3, as long as the full staff performance episodes did not occur every time the ADL was performed in the 7-day look-back period. It is only when every episode is full staff performance that total dependence, 4, can be coded. Remember that weight-bearing episodes that occur 3 or more times, or full staff performance that is provided 3 or more times during part but not all of the last 7 days are included in the ADL Self-Performance coding level definition for extensive assistance, 3. Second, when there is a combination of full staff performance and weight-bearing assistance that total 3 or more times, code extensive assistance, 3. Finally, when there is a combination of full staff performance, weight-bearing assistance, and/or non-weight-bearing assistance that total 3 or more times, code limited assistance, or 2.
Mary, how about an example to demonstrate the third rule of 3?
Certainly, Dave. Mrs. F was in the nursing home for only 1 day prior to transferring to another facility. The following assistance for the eating ADL was provided the day Mrs. F was in the nursing home. Twice, she required weight-bearing assistance to help her lift her fork to her mouth. One time in the evening, the staff fed Mrs. F because she could not scoop the food on her plate with the fork, nor could she lift the fork to her mouth.
Well, how would you code the scenario?
Looking at the ADL scenario, we can see that the ADL occurred 3 times in the look-back period, but not 3 times at any one level. Looking at all of the ADL self-performance coding level definitions and the instructions for the rule of 3, the appropriate code determination is extensive assistance 3.
Okay, so Mary, what's the rationale behind this code?
Based on the information provided, none of the ADL self-performance coding level definitions fit this scenario. Therefore, the assessor should continue on looking at the instructions for the rule of 3. The first rule of 3 does not apply because although the ADL occurred 3 or more times, it did not occur 3 times at any one level. The second rule of 3 does not apply because although the ADL occurred 3 or more times, it did not occur 3 or more times at multiple levels.
So it looks like we used the third rule of 3. Can you explain why?
The third rule of 3 applies because the ADL occurred 3 times at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level. Sub-item A under the third rule of 3 requires conversion of episodes of full staff performance to weight-bearing assistance as long as the full staff performance episodes did not occur every time the ADL occurred in the 7-day look-back period. Therefore, the one episode of full staff performance is considered weight-bearing assistance and is added to the other 2 episodes of weight-bearing assistance. Looking at sub-item B of the third rule of 3, this combination totals 3 episodes of weight-bearing assistance and therefore yields the code extensive assistance 3.
Thanks, Mary. Lori, could you take us through another ADL scenario related to the third rule of 3?
Okay, Dave. Mr. N was admitted to a nursing home but was sent to the hospital on the 2nd day he was there. The following assistance for the dressing ADL was provided to Mr. N over the 7-day look-back period. Weight-bearing assistance 1 time to lift Mr. N's right arm into his shirt sleeves when dressing in the morning on day 1. Non-weight-bearing assistance 1 time to button his shirt in the morning on day 2, and full staff performance 1 time on day 2 to put his pants on after resting in bed in the afternoon. Mr. N was independent in the evening on day 1 when undressing and getting his bedclothes on.
So, Lori, how is this coded?
Well, let's see. We have weight-bearing assistance on day 1, non-weight-bearing assistance on day 2, full staff performance 1 time on day 2, and also 1 instance of independence for dressing on day 1. Based on the instructions for the rule of 3, the final code determination is limited assistance 2.
Can you go over each rule of 3 so it's clear how you got to limited assistance?
Certainly, Dave. In this scenario, the dressing ADL occurred 4 times. Because the ADL self-performance coding level definitions do not fit this scenario, and since this ADL activity has occurred 3 or more times, we must apply the steps of the rule of 3. The first rule of 3 does not apply because even though the ADL occurred 3 times, it did not occur 3 times at any one level. The second rule of 3 does not apply because the ADL did not occur 3 times at multiple levels. The third rule of 3 does apply because the ADL occurred 3 times and at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level.
So, Lori, can you explain exactly why the third rule of 3 applies in this scenario?
Yes, Dave. Looking at sub-item A, it requires that the assessor convert episodes of full staff performance to weight-bearing assistance. After this conversion, the assessor should now have 2 weight-bearing episodes and 1 non-weight-bearing episode. The third rule of 3, sub-item B, does not apply because even though there are now 2 episodes of weight-bearing assistance, you would need 1 more episode of weight-bearing assistance to make 3 episodes to code Extensive Assistance 3. We should also account for the 1 episode of non-weight-bearing assistance. Let's see how that fits into the last sub-item instruction in the third rule of 3. The third sub-item C under the third rule of 3 states that when there is a combination of full staff performance, weight-bearing assistance, and/or non-weight-bearing assistance that total 3 or more times, the assessor is to code limited assistance 2. Since this ADL scenario fits the third rule of 3, sub-item C, limited assistance 2, is the code that the assessor should use.
Thank you, Lori. A provider in Ohio has a question about coding a specific scenario. The provider indicates that during the 7-day look-back period, the toileting ADL occurred 20 times. Mr. S was able to toilet independently without assistance 18 times. The other 2 times toileting occurred in the look-back period, Mr. S required staff assistance. This assistance is classified as non-weight-bearing assistance. The assessor determined that the appropriate code for toilet use was Code 1, Supervision. Mary, can you take us through this?
Yes, Dave. This example actually is quite rare and does not fit with any of the Rule of 3 conditions. Let's review this step by step. There were many independent episodes in this scenario. However, remember that in order to code independent 0, the resident must complete the ADL without any help or oversight from staff every time. Since Mr. S required assistance from staff twice, Code 0 does not apply. Code 7, activity occurred only once or twice, does not apply because the activity itself occurred 20 times. Even though there were episodes of non-weight-bearing assistance provided to the resident, the definition for limited assistance, 2, is not met because this level of assistance did not occur 3 or more times. None of the other ADL self-performance coding level definitions apply directly to this ADL scenario. When looking at the instructions for the Rule of 3, the ADL scenario does not apply to the first, second, or third Rule of 3. However, there is a final statement under the Rule of 3 that says, if none of the above are met, code supervision. Therefore, since we were not able to apply any of the ADL self-performance coding level definitions or the Rule of 3 to this ADL scenario, the appropriate code is supervision. Again, this type of ADL scenario should actually be very rare. CMS devised the third Rule of 3 and this final instruction precisely so that providers could incorporate these types of ADL scenarios into current coding level definitions in a way that gave an appropriate indication of the types of staffing levels that would occur in such rare circumstances. In this way, it can be said that the third Rule of 3 in this final instruction actually captures exceptions to the ADL self-performance coding level definitions. That is, even though CMS has aligned portions of the Rule of 3 to correspond with the coding levels of Supervision 1, Limited Assistance 2, and Extensive Assistance 3, it does not mean that the actual ADL self-performance coding level definitions for these 3 codes apply to the ADL scenario. CMS is trying to give facilities a way to code this item even in circumstances that may only occur rarely or only once or twice for that matter.
Thanks, Mary. Is there anything else you'd like to add or mention at this point?
I'm glad you asked, Dave. I would like to briefly discuss the ADL self-performance algorithm. The first thing to remember is that the algorithm is not a standalone tool. It was created to assist facilities and augment all of the instructions for Item G0110, including the ADL self-performance coding level definitions and the Rule of 3. Recently, there were some improvements made to the ADL self-performance algorithm to make it more user-friendly. The first change is the Start Here box. Additional language was added to emphasize the importance of understanding the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions and the instructions for the rule of three before using the algorithm. Also, please note that shortened coding level definitions are embedded in the algorithm. You will see this as you read through the algorithm. This was done so that everything could fit on one page. The information in the bubbles and boxes provide enough information for the coding level definitions. However, keep a copy of the coding level definitions handy. There are also changes to the instructions for the rule of three box. You will see that all of the exceptions to the rule of three have been added at the very top of the box, and each rule of three now matches the language in the RAI user's manual to a greater degree. However, again, some of the language is shortened so that everything fits in the box. In addition to having a copy of the coding level definitions handy, you may also want to have the text for the rule of three. The two boxes that are associated with the third rule of three's sub-items B and C now have a double line surrounding the box. The double line is meant to emphasize the importance of the information here. There are also asterisks in the algorithm which relate to the instructions for the rule of three box. This directs assessors to additional guidance at these points in the algorithm. These additional enhancements provide guidance on the correct use of this tool. The algorithm is provided to augment the manual text.
Thanks, Mary. Lori, could you code one of our previous examples from today using the algorithm?
Okay, let's go back to Mr. N. The ADL in that scenario occurred 4 times. Mr. N received weight-bearing assistance once, non-weight-bearing assistance once, and full staff performance once. He was independent 1 time in the evening on day 1. Based on the answer before, the final code determination should be limited assistance 2. Looking at the Start Here box, we have reviewed the ADL Self-Performance coding level definitions and the instructions for the rule of three. So I'm going to jump right to the first box, which states, did the activity occur at least 1 time? Based on the scenario, the answer is yes. So we proceed to the next box. The next box asks, did the activity occur 3 or more times? Yes, it did. So let's continue. The next box asks, did the resident fully perform the ADL without any help or oversight from staff every time? We know that this did not apply because there were 3 times where the resident required assistance and only 1 time where he performed the activity without any help. So we will answer this question as no and continue moving down the algorithm. The next box says, did the resident require full staff performance every time? Out of the 4 episodes that did occur, there was only 1 episode where full staff performance was required, so this statement doesn't apply. Therefore, the answer is no, and we proceed to the next box. The next box asks, did the resident require full staff performance at least 3 times, but not every time, or weight-bearing assistance 3 or more times? According to our ADL scenario, we only have 1 episode of weight-bearing assistance and 1 episode of full staff performance. Therefore, this does not apply. Answer no and continue down the algorithm. The next box is a double line box with an asterisk where we need to pay attention to the instructions within it. This box states, did the resident require a combination of full staff performance and weight-bearing assistance that total 3 or more times? The asterisk refers us over to the related paragraph in the instructions for the rule of 3. This box in the algorithm corresponds to A, B, and C under the third rule of 3 above. The instruction in this box only applies when the third rule of 3 applies, such as an activity occurs 3 or more times and at multiple levels, but not 3 times at any one level, such as 2 times non-weight-bearing and 2 times weight-bearing. If the coding scenario does not meet the third rule of three, do not apply A, B, or C of the third rule of three. Answer no, and then continue down the algorithm. After reviewing this information, the ADL scenario does apply to the third rule of three. And while the assessor would be able to combine the 1 time of full staff performance and 1 time of weight-bearing assistance, that total would not equal 3, so sub-item B would not apply. Therefore, the answer here is no, and the assessor should continue down the algorithm. The next box states, did the resident require non-weight-bearing assistance 3 or more times? The answer to that is no, because the resident only required this level of assistance once. Proceed to the next box. In the next box, we see that it is another one of the double-line boxes. So again, we are going to pay attention to the question being asked and the related paragraph that it refers us to in the instructions of the rule of three box to the right of the algorithm. This question asks, did the resident require a combination of full staff performance, weight-bearing assistance, and/or non-weight-bearing assistance that total 3 or more times? Well, let's look back at our ADL scenario. We already know from the prior double-line box that when we tried to combine the episode of weight-bearing assistance with the episode of full staff performance, that we only had 2 episodes of weight-bearing assistance. So we were not allowed to stop at sub-item B of the third rule of three. The next step would be to look at the sub-item C of the third rule of three, which is what this box in the algorithm refers to. Even though we did not have enough episodes to total 3 weight-bearing episodes, we do have an additional episode that occurred at the non-weight-bearing level that we can consider here. If we add that 1 non-weight-bearing episode to the 2 weight-bearing episodes from our previous attempt at applying the sub-item B in the third rule of three, we do get to 3 episodes, and it does meet the criteria outlined in the third rule of three, sub-item C. At this point in the algorithm, we would stop here because this is the first code that applies to our scenario as we moved down the algorithm. The code then that corresponds to sub-item C and is met by our scenario is limited assistance, or 2. This is the same answer we reached by following the manual text alone.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Now, working through the example and the algorithm methodically makes it very clear how to use all of the instructions to help get the correct code. So thank you, Mary and Lori, for all of your helpful information. This has been a very focused and detailed presentation on item G0110 in section G, and I would like to thank the panelists for sharing these insights with us today. Assessors are encouraged to review item G0110 instructions in section G very carefully to ensure a complete understanding of how to code this item and for the proper use of the ADL Self-Performance algorithm. If you still have questions after doing so, discuss specific ADL scenarios with your state RAI coordinator. Contact information for state RAI coordinators is available in Appendix B of the RAI User's Manual. We hope you found this presentation helpful and informative. The work that you do is important work in ensuring the best possible care for the residents entrusted to the care of America's nursing homes. And to all of you taking part in this educational activity, I would like to extend a final thank you on behalf of myself, Mary, Lori, and CMS.